Hello friends, I am Vinoy Krishna. I just decided to make small videos on the different aspects associated with the coronavirus disease and the coronavirus per se. I'll try to reduce the technical jargons and its meaning or understanding into the simple terms so that we could utilize the understanding into making a holistic understanding for the same. Let us begin. We will start today with a simple topic, but is being repeated quite a lot as a desirable objective by the media, that is the herd immunity. We will go into the details of it, because even if it is projected as something which is desirable, they say devil lies in the details. We will see what are the different practical aspects associated with that. Let me reduce the meaning of herd immunity in simple terms first before we get more explicit. The term immunity, I believe all of you must be knowing, refers to the very basic or fundamental trait of any organism which allows the organism to defend itself against the foreign pathogens or the invaders. Let's assume the foreign pathogens that I am referring to are the bacteria, viruses, fungi, to name some. These, because of their disease causing ability, could be what we call as the foreign pathogens. It is, immunity refers to a very sophisticated system of fighting against them. Now I'll cut the long story short. Primarily, immunity or the immune system involves having the fighting tools to fight against these invaders. The most important fighting tool that you would ever come across is the term what you call as antibody. Again, just understand the simple meaning of it. Antibodies are those entities which are generated in specific response to the specific agents which in sufficient quantity bind to these invaders and facilitate their breakdown into harmless fragments. And that is what we call as immunity. Now, when do we call a person immune? A person would said to be immune against it when the person is capable of generating the antibodies against the specific invader or the pathogen very quick or fast enough. However, in case the antibody production is too delayed, that is when the pathogens get the opportunity to then infect the individual and manifest itself into the pathological condition called as disease. So I hope you have now understood what the term immunity refers to. Now, immunity is a trait that a person can possess either as an inborn ability or through the learned behavior. What I mean to say, this ability to produce antibody or be immune against a specific pathogen could either be inborn or, as I told you, learned or acquired. Now, how does a person acquire it? The person may acquire the trait by either facing the disease itself. So how do you acquire the immunity against a disease? Face it, win over it, and as the trophy, you get the immunity against that disease. Or even if you don't want to get the disease and still want to have the immunity as an acquired trait, that is where the artificial method, that is a very common term that you come across, vaccination, comes into. So either you undergo the vaccination, a detailed topic altogether, I'll make a separate video on that. Just know for the time being, you get the immunity either by vaccination or by facing the disease and not surrendering to it. Fine enough. So that's about the immunity. Now coming to another aspect. Immunity fundamentally exists at the individual levels So every individual has to develop its separate immunity. However, immunity could also be a group behavior, or it could be the trait of the species or altogether the population. So the herd immunity, in the very simplified term, refers to the immunity that is developed as the trait of the entire species rather than just the individual. We will revisit this herd immunity in a little more detail, but before that, let us now move to the topic of our attention, and that is the COVID-19 or the causative agent that you call as the SARS CoV2. It is so called because it was the same coronavirus that was earlier responsible for having caused the epidemic on severe acute respiratory syndrome. It is just an evolved version of the same virus. We are called at the second version, or SARS-CoV-2. We all know that COVID disease 19 is for 2019 when it occurred, is number one, an infectious disease. Infectious disease means it is caused by the infection of a virus. Additionally, the COVID-19 also is transmissible, which is to say that the virus can transmit from one human to the other. And this is where the disease becomes dangerous. Now, the fact that disease is a contagious one, it can travel from one person to other, we must have a stay on this term for a little longer. Like, how contagious? Why is this contagious disease being talked a little more than the other contagious diseases that you must have on a regular basis come across? You see, the degree of transmissibility or the contagiousness is quantified by a simple term called as the R0 value. This R0 value, also called as the reproduction number, is the trait of a particular pathogen. Let's say in this case the coronavirus. R0 or the reproduction value or reproduction number refers to the average number of people that one infected person can further infect. I'll repeat, the average number of people that an infected person can infect. So, for example, the earlier SARS epidemic that we have had the R0 of something around 224, and the present COVID disease 2019 also is supposedly having the R0 value of 224. It's not yet clear, the entire picture. Now, for that matter, let's say the seasonal flu that we have has the R0 value something around 1.6 to 2. So what that actually means, on an average, one person can infect around 2 people. Now, needless to stress that higher the reproduction number or higher the R0 value, higher the transmissibility and more the danger. Having understood this much, you see, whether a disease might turn into an epidemic or not could be understood by understanding the R0 values and the possibilities. Let's say if the R0 value is equal to 1, so one person can infect at the most one person, the disease condition would be stable. It will not exponentially grow, so it will not turn into an epidemic. If the R0 value is less than 1, it means a person will infect on an average less than one person, so the disease will on itself die out with time. So again, that is not also a very major concern for the epidemiologists. But the problem happens when the R0 value exceeds 1, and this is where one person being capable of infecting more than one people has the chance of turning the disease into an epidemic, or as we are witnessing now, a pandemic. Fine enough. So this is what we call as the R naught value or the reproduction number. Having understood this far, let me revisit the concept of herd immunity. Now I'll first define it for you and then we will try to understand. The herd immunity could be understood as sufficient number of individuals in a population immune against a disease, let's say coronavirus in our case, so as to shield against the ability of the infected people to transmit the disease to non-infected, non-immune individuals. Now try to understand this again. What we are saying, herd immunity refers to the sufficient number of individuals in a population immune against a particular disease so as to shield against the ability of infected people to further infect non-infected or non-immune individuals. What it practically means, let's decode this. Let's say we are talking about, let's say this is an infected person with COVID, and potentially this person can further infect. What is the R naught value? We have understood 2 to 4. Let's assume 4. So this person can further infect 4 people, and these people will again further infect possibly 4 people. That would again depend on how many people do they come across. And you can understand, if this is what that continues, it will expand itself into a explosive situation wherein the entire population might get infected. Now try to understand this. Let's put this definition here. What it says, a sufficient number of people which are immune. So what we now assume, not everyone is equal. Let's say this fellow was infected, but out of the 4 people that this fellow meets, 3 of them are immune, and hence they don't get the disease, and hence they don't pass it forward to 4 more. Just 1 out of the 4, which means 75% of the population, as you could see, they are immune, right? Only 25% are non-immune. They have a chance, if at all this fellow was unfortunate and met this person, to get the disease and further take it forward. But since 75% of the population is immune, out of the 4 that this person also meets, only 1 person might be unfortunate to have met him and further get the disease transmitted. So can you see, these people, even if they are non-infected, non-immune, they did not get the disease. These people also, non-infected, non-immune, did not get the disease. And here also, this fellow, the chances of meeting and getting transmitted the disease would be much lesser, because this person might meet this one or this one, and hence might not end up transmitting the infection. So I hope you have now got the concept of herd immunity. Why? If a sufficient number of people are immune, they would also help in shielding against an infected person to transmit the disease to the non-infected, non-immune individuals. But then the million-dollar question is, what do we call as the sufficient number? Alright, let's proceed. So when do we call that the population has got the sufficient number of people immune so that we can have a herd immunity or the ability to shield the non-infected people against the disease? See, there is a simple formula. For any given population that you have, the number of people that should be immune to have the entire population immune against the disease is R0 minus 1 by R0 of that pathogen fraction of the total population. What we mean, I'll repeat. Let's say if we are talking about the coronavirus, we have all taken the R0 value of coronavirus, wherein one infected person can infect 4 more people. Yes, 4 minus 1 by 4 fraction of the total population, which means 3/4 of the total population. If we get these number of people, 3/4 of the total population immune, we will have the remaining 1/4 of the population also non-infected, non-immune, to be immune against the coronavirus, which is to say 75% of the total population, which is to say over 6 billion of the total population of the world should get the immunity. Now, if you remember, I had told you we can acquire immunity against a particular disease by 2 methods. Either by face the disease, you get the disease and you win over it, or you undergo vaccination. Fine. So these are the only 2 options that we have in order to acquire the herd immunity. Do we have the vaccination ready? Have we developed the vaccine yet? No. So that goes out of the option. Does that mean that if at all this happens to be projected as the desired trait by the different media houses or whatever, that simply is hinting that at least the 75% of the world, if at all we are not considering the vaccination, must get the disease and win over it to acquire the immunity, which however is highly impractical a solution, because we know if we allow that to happen in a civilized society, that would mean getting overwhelmed with the number of people get infected, and given the immune status of the people variable based on the nutritional status, based on the age parameters, wherein you have seen that the older ones are more vulnerable to it, they may succumb to it. So the number of deaths that we might have to tolerate is something which is too difficult to go for. And that is why when United Kingdom and even Brazil for that matter and some other countries, they decided not to effectively invoke the lockdown procedures, they were heavily criticized, because it was assumed that these nations or the governments are trying to go for this route of acquiring the herd immunity, which of course would mean that getting overwhelmed with the number of people infected, and that would also mean extreme pressure on the hospital or the healthcare infrastructure so as to collapse totally. Now, if you've understood so far, let us now take it forward. Now, let us understand where we stand, and I'll then take you to what should be the possible strategy through a simple graph, wherein the x-axis represents the time, which may be in days, months and years, and the y-axis refers to number of people or persons infected per day. per day. Let's assume coronavirus has a natural rate of infection in the population. So there is an exponential growth and the number of people infected keeps on increasing until which the maximum is reached and then undergoes a decline and then has reached the herd immunity anyway once the 75% of the, let's say the entire area under the graph represents the 100% of the population. So after the 75% anyway, the rate of infection becomes extremely slow because we have already understood the population acquires the herd immunity. So this is how the graph would look like if the number of people getting infected is uncontrolled and the natural thing happens. However, we are not going to allow that because the number of people getting infected per day would be extremely disproportionately more to what the healthcare infrastructure can sustain. So what we now need to do is to push this graph down. So try to imagine, if I am pushing this further down, what would happen? If I am reducing the y-axis, I am pushing this bell down, the base of the bell will then start expanding. And this is where you must be coming across a very commonly used term, something that we are trying for, flattening of the curve. So if you simply flatten the curve, it would mean that you are increasing the time by which 75% of the population will get the disease and get the herd immunity, and hence this time might go in years. And how do we flatten the curve? How do we reduce the rate of the infection? The rate of the infection could be reduced at this moment by very intensive process called as the lockdown, or as you also called as the social distancing. So when you do the lockdown or the social distancing, you don't allow the people to meet, and hence this lockdown process is a process of artificially reducing the R0 value, and hence the number of people that are getting infected per day get reduced, and that is how the graph gets this shape. But does that mean in doing that we are compromising on the time that it will take for the herd immunity to come? The answer is yes. For how long? It may run to be years. Now, does that mean that the lockdown or social distancing may also go on for years? Yes, until the vaccination gets developed. So here we have to go for the lockdown or social distancing as a very long-term solution. So anyone who is thinking that this is a very temporary sort of thing is grossly mistaken, because until the vaccination development happens, this is one thing that we'll have to go for. Otherwise, the number of people infected per day would grossly be more than what the healthcare infrastructure can support, and the world would experience the casualties in huge numbers. There is also another catch that we have to be careful about. When it comes to vaccination, I'll make a separate video on what the status of the vaccine development is, but for the time being, you must all be coming across the fact that on an average they say that 18 months or so would be needed to develop the vaccine, which to my assessment is again a promise that will be very difficult to keep, because there are different processes of the vaccine development that in itself takes a long process, and any hasty development of the vaccine would itself have a lot of risk associated. We have had histories wherein the vaccine development has rather costed us more than finding a cure to the disease. We'll come to that. So the vaccine development is also something that is not very close in the sight. So social distancing, but then lockdown is not a harmless process, because we all know that lockdown comes with a huge socio-economic cost. So how can or what can we do regarding that? I mean, we cannot have a permanent lockdown or a shutdown kind of a scenario that we are having, presently, because this is something that will make it highly unsustainable. So having understood the concept of herd immunity and how we are dealing with the issue of stretching the reaching of herd immunity by lockdown and the social distancing until the vaccination happens, now we come to another problem, that is the socio-economic cost that we have to go through. So having understood these concepts, all right, so what could be the way forward? All right, I'll quickly tell you some of the points wherein we'll have to, be taking it forward. One, we will have to extend the lockdown or the social distancing as the way of life with qualified relaxation. When I say qualified, I mean to say conditional in space. So the different areas with different profile of the epidemic will accordingly be given the relaxation. In time, the relaxation will also be variable in time. So it has to be a qualified relaxation in space, time, and also the sectors of economy. So we'll have to be very selective in which all sectors of the economy are we relaxing, and what will decide the extent of relaxation? The extent of relaxation will always be decided by the expected rise. Now this is a very scientific process to be done then. Expected rise in numbers of infection, and this rise in the number of infection should be in proportion to your healthcare infrastructure. So every country knows that this is the total number of the infections that we can deal with. Accordingly, your relaxation has to be qualified in space, time, and the different sectors of economy. Having understood that, to prioritize the drug development, fine. Now, vaccine development is going to take its own sweet time. The development of the drug itself also takes over 10-15 years on a normal average, which again means in the drug development we will have to go for an alternative strategy of finding out the drugs which could be alternatively used as the treatment of COVID, meaning the drugs which are already used for a certain disease but could also benefit us in managing the COVID. These drugs are called as repurposed drugs. So what advantage they will have is they will reduce the time that would be taken for the entire stretch of the clinical trials and the development in the lab, because they have all been through that already. So you just have to find out whether they are impactful or effective in the dealing with the COVID. So there are some candidates that we all are coming across the name of, like hydroxychloroquine, a drug used for malaria treatment or autoimmune disorder, or for that matter there are different viral therapies or retroviral therapies, drugs like those used in HIV which are being tried out at the moment. So there are a few candidates. Again, I'll try making a separate video on that later, something that we'll have to talk about. Then regarding the vaccine development, I suggest there has to be a global concerted injection of fund, because one of the biggest limitation in the vaccine development would be how much fund is devolved to this. So rather than going, the nations and the laboratories going all alone, which they can do if they wish to, we must have the global concerted injection of the fund into the dedicated laboratories for the quick development of vaccines, and of course for their exhaustive availability as well. So the production is also scaled up so that it gets available to the entire world. Now, as we've already understood that social distancing is something that is going to be longer, it is very important that the governments and the societies start understanding that social distancing has to now be a part of your lifestyle. This may sound to be a little harsh, but yes, that's a reality. So this has to be a part of the your lifestyle. So the way you walk around, the way you meet people, the working pattern, everything must accordingly be adjusted, and the governments must act proactive in that direction so that their work profile could accordingly be adjusted and the economy does not face much crisis because of that. In a sense that being too consumerist in your attitude is going to hit us hard. So in that sense, it is high time that the world does again come back to the Gandhian way of life, or it is all the more important that we invoke the spirit of sustainable development, which is anyway required to meet the goals of sustainable developments. So this is one thing that is expected out of the societies all across the world and the governments to be proactive in their policy making. Now, another thing, there are many innovations in testing, treatment and care of the patients that are coming up by various individuals and institutions. It is very much important that the government creates an environment that facilitates a quick industrial incubation. So we must ensure that the different innovations that are coming in, the different testing kits available, or the treatment methods, or the ventilators for that matter, or the care of the patients, they must immediately get transformed or scaled up into the industrial production so that the availability does not become much of a challenge in management of this disease. Anyway, so far we have covered the herd immunity and the different aspects associated with that. There are different topics associated that I'll try preparing videos on. I'll be welcoming all the doubts associated with the discussion that we have had so far. Fine enough. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.